Welcome to VTP Exam Topics 4, CCNA and CCNP Routing and Switching. Prerequisites for VTP. Before you create VLANs, you must decide whether to use the VLAN trunking protocol, VTP, in your network. Using VTP, you can make configuration changes centrally on one or more switches and have those changes automatically communicated to all the other switches in the network. Without VTP, you cannot send information about VLANs to other switches. VTP is designed to work in an environment where updates are made on a single switch and are sent through VTP to other switches in the domain. It does not work well in a situation where multiple updates to the VLAN database occur simultaneously on switches in the same domain, which would result in an inconsistency in the VLAN database. The switch supports a total of 4,094 VLANs. However, the number of configured features affects the usage of the switch hardware. If the switch is notified by VTP of a new VLAN and the switch is already using the maximum available hardware resources, it sends a message that there are not enough hardware resources available and shuts down the VLAN. The output of the show VLAN user exec command shows the VLAN in a suspended state. You can enable or disable VTP by entering the No VTP interface configuration command. When you disable VTP on trunking ports, all VTP instances for that port are disabled. You cannot set VTP to off for the MST database and on for the VLAN database on the same port. When you globally set VTP mode to off, it applies to all the trunking ports in the system. However, you can specify on or off on a per VTP instance basis. For example, you can configure the switch as a VTP server for the VLAN database but with VTP off for the MST database. Because trunk ports send and receive VTP advertisements, you must ensure that at least one trunk port is configured on the switch or switch stack and that this trunk port is connected to the trunk port of another switch. Otherwise, the switch cannot receive any VTP advertisements. Restrictions for VTP. Before adding a VTP client switch to a VTP domain, always verify that its VTP configuration revision number is lower than the configuration revision number of the other switches in the VTP domain. Switches in a VTP domain always use the VLAN configuration of the switch with the highest VTP configuration revision number. If you add a switch that has a revision number higher than the revision number in the VTP domain, it can erase all VLAN information from the VTP server and VTP domain. VTP. VTP is a Layer 2 messaging protocol that maintains VLAN configuration consistency by managing the addition, deletion, and renaming of VLANs on a network-wide basis. VTP minimizes misconfigurations and configuration inconsistencies that can cause several problems, such as duplicate VLAN names, incorrect VLAN type specifications, and security violations. VTP functionality is supported across the stack, and all switches in the stack maintain the same VLAN and VTP configuration inherited from the active switch. When a switch learns of a new VLAN through VTP messages or when a new VLAN is configured by the user, the new VLAN information is communicated to all switches in the stack. When a switch joins the stack or when stacks merge, the new switches get VTP information from the active switch. VTP version 1 and version 2 support only normal range VLANs, VLAN IDs 1 to 1005. VTP version 3 supports the entire VLAN range, VLANs 1 to 4094. Extended range VLANs, VLANs 1006 to 4094, are supported only in VTP version 3. You cannot convert from VTP version 3 to VTP version 2 if extended VLANs are configured in the domain. VTP domain. A VTP domain, also called a VLAN management domain, consists of one switch or several interconnected switches or switch stacks under the same administrative responsibility sharing the same VTP domain name. A switch can be in only one VTP domain. You make global VLAN configuration changes for the domain. By default, the switch is in the VTP no management domain state until it receives an advertisement for a domain over a trunk link, a link that carries the traffic of multiple VLANs, or until you configure a domain name. Until the management domain name is specified or learned, you cannot create or modify VLANs on a VTP server, and VLAN information is not propagated over the network. If the switch receives a VTP advertisement over a trunk link, it inherits the management domain name and the VTP configuration revision number. The switch then ignores advertisements with a different domain name or an earlier configuration revision number. When you make a change to the VLAN configuration on a VTP server, the change is propagated to all switches in the VTP domain. VTP advertisements are sent over all trunk connections, including inter-switch link, ISL, and 802.1q. VTP dynamically maps VLANs with unique names and internal index associates across multiple LAN types. Mapping eliminates excessive device administration required from network administrators. If you configure a switch for VTP transparent mode, you can create and modify VLANs, but the changes are not sent to other switches in the domain, and they affect only the individual switch. However, configuration changes made when the switch is in this mode are saved in the switch running configuration and can be saved to the switch startup configuration file. Adding a VTP client switch to a VTP domain. Follow these steps to verify and reset the VTP configuration revision number on a switch before adding it to a VTP domain. Before adding a VTP client to a VTP domain, always verify that its VTP configuration revision number is lower than the configuration revision number of the other switches in the VTP domain. Switches in a VTP domain always use the VLAN configuration of the switch with the highest VTP configuration revision number. With VTP versions 1 and 2, adding a switch that has a revision number higher than the revision number in the VTP domain can erase all VLAN information from the VTP server and VTP domain. With VTP version 3, the VLAN information is not erased. You can use the VTP Mode transparent global command to disable VTP on the switch and then to change its VLAN information without affecting the other switches in the VTP domain. Enables privileged exec mode. Checks the VTP configuration revision number. If the number is 0, add a switch to the VTP domain. If the number is greater than 0, follow these sub-steps. Write down the domain name. Write down the configuration revision number. Continue with the next steps to reset the switch configuration revision number. Enters the global configuration mode. Changes the domain name from the original one displayed in step 1 to a new name. Returns to privileged exec mode. The VLAN information on the switch is updated and the configuration revision number is reset to 0. Verifies that the configuration revision number has been reset to 0. Enters global configuration mode. Enters the original domain name on the switch. Returns to privileged exec mode. The VLAN information on the switch is updated. Optional. Verifies that the domain name is the same as in step 1 and that the configuration revision number is 0. After resetting the configuration revision number, add a switch to the VTP domain. Note: you can use the VTP Mode transparent global configuration command to disable VTP on the switch and then to change its VLAN information without affecting the other switches in the VTP domain. VTP modes. VTP server. In VTP server mode, you can create, modify, and delete VLANs, and specify other configuration parameters, such as the VTP version, for the entire VTP domain. VTP servers advertise their VLAN configurations to other switches in the same VTP domain and synchronize their VLAN configurations with other switches based on advertisements received over trunk links. VTP server is the default mode. In VTP server mode, VLAN configurations are saved in NVRAM. If the switch detects a failure while writing a configuration to NVRAM, VTP mode automatically changes from server mode to client mode. If this happens, the switch cannot be returned to VTP server mode until the NVRAM is functioning. VTP client. A VTP client functions like a VTP server and transmits and receives VTP updates on its trunks, but you cannot create, change, or delete VLANs on a VTP client. VLANs are configured on another switch in the domain that is in server mode. In VTP versions 1 and 2 in VTP client mode, VLAN configurations are not saved in NVRAM. In VTP version 3, VLAN configurations are saved in NVRAM in client mode. VTP transparent. VTP transparent switches do not participate in VTP. A VTP transparent switch does not advertise its VLAN configuration and does not synchronize its VLAN configuration based on received advertisements. However, in VTP version 2 or version 3, transparent switches do forward VTP advertisements that they receive from other switches through their trunk interfaces. You can create, modify, and delete VLANs on a switch in VTP transparent mode. In VTP versions 1 and 2, the switch must be in VTP transparent mode when you create extended range VLANs. VTP version 3 also supports creating extended range VLANs in client or server mode. In VTP versions 1 and 2, the switch must be in VTP transparent mode when you create private VLANs, and when they are configured, you should not change the VTP mode from transparent to client or server mode. VTP version 3 also supports private VLANs in client and server modes. When private VLANs are configured, do not change the VTP mode from transparent to client or server mode. When the switch is in VTP transparent mode, the VTP and VLAN configurations are saved in NVRAM, but they are not advertised to other switches. In this mode, VTP mode and domain name are saved in the switch running configuration, and you can save this information in the switch startup configuration file by using the copy running config startup config privileged exec command. In a switch stack, the running configuration and the saved configuration are the same for all switches in a stack. VTP off. A switch in VTP off mode functions in the same manner as a VTP transparent switch, except that it does not forward VTP advertisements on trunks. Configuring VTP mode. You can configure VTP mode as one of these: VTP server mode. In VTP server mode, you can change the VLAN configuration and have it propagated throughout the network. VTP client mode. In VTP client mode, you cannot change its VLAN configuration. The client switch receives VTP updates from a VTP server in the VTP domain and then modifies its configuration accordingly. VTP transparent mode. In VTP transparent mode, VTP is disabled on the switch. The switch does not send VTP updates and does not act on VTP updates received from other switch. However, a VTP transparent switch running VTP version 2 does forward received VTP advertisements on its trunk links. VTP off mode. VTP off mode is the same as VTP transparent mode, except that VTP advertisements are not forwarded. When you configure a domain name, it cannot be removed. You can only reassign a switch to a different domain. Enables privileged exec mode. Enter your password if prompted. Enters the global configuration mode. Configures the VTP administrative domain name. The name can be 1 to 32 characters. All switches operating in VTP server or client mode under the same administrative responsibility must be configured with the same domain name. This command is optional for modes other than server mode. VTP server mode requires a domain name. If the switch has a trunk connection to a VTP domain, the switch learns the domain name from the VTP server in the domain. You should configure the VTP domain before configuring other VTP parameters. Configures the switch for VTP mode, client, server, transparent, or off. Optional. Sets the password for the VTP domain. The password can be 8 to 64 characters. If you configure a VTP password, the VTP domain does not function properly if you do not assign the same password to each switch in the domain. Returns to privileged exec mode. Verifies your entries in the VTP operating mode and the VTP domain name fields of the display. Optional. Saves the configuration in the startup configuration file. Only VTP mode and domain name are saved in the switch running configuration and can be copied to the startup configuration file.